Bismillah wa salatu wa salam Rasulullah wa ba'd. In the name of Allah, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon His last and final messenger. As to what follows, family, friends, foes, haters, and hateettes, welcome back to the features. I greet you all in peace and love and no hatred in my heart. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So before we begin, please like, please subscribe, and please share. As you know, we got a lot of haters up in here. Okay. And today I have an esteemed guest, our elder, Imam Councilman Alfred Muhammad. Now, just a little bit about the Imam. He became Muslim in 1962, correct?
That is correct.
1962, he became Muslim. He became Muslim with the Nation of Islam,
That's correct.
and then later joined the Worthy Muhammad community, correct?
Well, I would say we transitioned from Nation of Islam to the Imam Warthadean Muhammad. Well, we didn't call it Imam Warthadean Muhammad community. We call ourselves. Well, we had several names, the ASM, but let's just say the Muslim Society in America, the natives, the Muslim African American Society. I prefer that better. And our Imam is Imam Warthadean Muhammad.
Yes. So what we have here is we have a living part of history before in our midst today, and I'm very honored to have you as our guest, Imam Councilman Alfred Muhammad. So if you can please start with telling us a little bit about your conversion, how you found out about Islam, what were you doing before Islam? Just tell us a little bit about your history before we continue.
Well, I guess I have to get my whole biography up, so I'll start. I was born July the 25th, 1947, in Lynchburg, Virginia. Lynchburg, Virginia is the home of John Lynch, who was the author of the Lynch Law, which was a law authorizing the killing of African slaves. Virginia was a state that did not believe in killing slaves unless they had authorization. Now, the Lynch family also, the brother was Charles that founded Lynchburg, and then they owned outside of Lynchburg a place called Lynch Station in Campbell County, which was the county in which Thomas Jefferson was born. Now, as a way of living history, I have to tell you that my principal, Gordon E. Hemmings, was the great grandson of Thomas Jefferson, and he was named. He changed his name in aversion to being Sally Henning's great grandson.
Yeah.
But he was
just before you continue, if you don't mind, I just want to give a little history that Thomas Jefferson was a well-known slave owner, and if you look at the American demographic, you'll find most Jeffersons are Black people, and that's because of him. All right. That's because people might be a little bit like, what is this link here, right? They don't know that the president of the United States was an ardent slave owner who actually had a slave, like a secret family, right?
A large secret family, and one of his favorites was his half sister, a half sister of his first wife. Which was a young lady that would have probably been charged with child molestation had the laws been effective. So those who want to condemn R. Kelly and those who want to condemn Bill Cosby, well, maybe you should contextualize it. Yes. So I think I'm giving you a bit of history. So now let's continue on.
Yes.
My grandmother, Lula Nallen, was born 1862, so she says, but she was probably born earlier. She was actually born on the Nallen plantation. And she was a slave. She was in Appomattox Courthouse the day that slavery ended. So I am one generation removed from slavery. She also was one of the biggest conjurers in Lynchburg. Rich white people came to her to cast spells upon people and to take all spells. Now, how do I come into all this picture? I am the youngest of 13 children of Virgie Mae Desmond, who's my paternal grandparents, but my paternal grandfather was born on the Desmond plantation. He was somewhat younger than my grandmother, but he took a few years younger, and they had 4 children, and my mother had 13. I was a last baby, and I got the call to preach at an early age, around 4 or 5 years old. By 5 years old, I was preaching.
Wow.
I actually started preaching in the church, and some of my family members say, "You don't sound much different than you were and did." But I think by the 5th grade, I looked in the geography book. I developed an interest in Islam. Don't know why. I was drawn to it. Now that may be some genetics. I don't want to get mystical and say I knew about Islam. But by way of history, I was invited to a temple in Lynchburg. One day I didn't go to church, and some Muslims, or they call them black Muslims, knocked on my door and invited me to the temple, and the rest is history. So on a cold day,
we're talking about the black Muslims. We're talking about
the Nation of Islam, headed by Mr. Elijah Muhammad. I call him honorable, but maybe people don't want to call him honorable. I can't call him anything less than Mr. Muhammad. Yeah. And I think that people should understand, when a group of people have great respect. Now, let me say in all fairness, how did I evolve to where I am now? Because he told us at several meetings that I am not teaching you Islam. I'm cleaning you up. I'm getting you out of the fire. And his last 2 sons were taught Islamically by a man by the name of Jamal Diaz. So if the prophet said deeds are judged by intention, if a man has his children to be educated in the Quran and Islamic jurisprudence, and have one of his sons to actually go to Azhar, then it tells me that man actually wanted al-Islam to be planted in his family and in his community. And I've heard him say, "I'm not teaching you Islam." I mean, plainly, I'm cleaning you up. I'm setting you up for the next man. So I look at him as a man who gave wudu and tayammun to a people and made them aware of that they were human beings. You see, you can't be a Muslim if you're not a human. You can't be a Muslim if you're insane. And slavery has driven us insane. Now, we didn't come to the West. We didn't come to the West insane. The West drove us insane when they kidnapped us, tortured us, raped us, and sodomized us. And no one talked about this. But African American men were sodomized publicly. So when you see an African American man with a lot of illnesses, I've said this publicly and I've said this privately. I'm not here to defend Robert Kelly. I'm not even here to discuss him. But we have to realize he came from a state where it was almost sanctioned raping of African American women and African American boys. So molestation, incest was introduced to us by the slave master.
In fact, as a matter of fact, when you're talking about this was a practice not only done in the Americas, but in the West Indies.
Throughout the Western Hemisphere. This was a strategy to shame a people. No,
it was called buck breaking or
buck breaking. Yeah, that's right. In fact, the West Indies was known for the breaking ground.
That's right.
Before they would bring the slaves here, they would bring them to the West Indies and break them. And the breaking process would start actually on the slave ship. They would bring a guy who might have been a mirror of a large region, bring him up to the deck, and bring a mirror, a woman. And she would in turn be raped, perhaps by the white slave master, even while she was on her menses, which would mean that she had a double forbidden act on her. So the shame in this king witnessing this was enough to put it into his genes, and it would break him. And then he would go back down into the slave quarters to suffer, to be around impurities. We have to soak this in because this is still in our genes. We have what is called epigenetics. That these type of issues were even epigenetically encoded into our DNA and our RNA. So after that, but prior to those persons getting on the ship, the African mother had to be walked about 800 miles through West Africa to the ship, and then going for 40 days in a dark, stinking place, like living in a toilet, barely eating. And then when they were brought into the West Indies, at Barbados, Jamaica, they were beaten. And now something I think a lot of us don't know what happened to Jamaica. It's a reason why, in a sense, a lot of Jamaicans are so beholden to the Queen. One Easter Sunday, they put approximately 400 Jamaicans in a cage. These were the rebellious ones on an Easter Sunday and set them on fire.
Wow.
And so the resistant ones went up into the mountains. They were called Maroons. The light-skinned ones who had been breeded with the slave master was around, and the dark-skinned was around, was so terrified. This is what is in us, is terror.
Yeah.
And while I'm at that, while we describe the plantation, before I get back to my own personal narrative, we wonder where the word MF comes from. Well, I can tell you where it came from. It came from the forcing of men to have sex with their mother.
Yeah.
You want to know where the word playboy came from? Playboy was the boy that was on the plantation to play with the master's son. And whatever play he wanted, they wanted to do with him. And occasionally, and many times, he played with the mistress. And all kinds of freakish acts. That's why the biggest genre of porno is now BBCs. You're getting the whole history. This is all the stuff we have to struggle with. Now, with that in mind, the Nation of Islam presented a picture to me of that ugly thing. I didn't have to look far to bear witness. And it said on one side of the blackboard was slavery, suffering, and death. And there was an African-American black man on the cross with his neck broken. And the flag was turned upside down. The other side was Islam, the Star Crescent, freedom, justice, and equality.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, Imam Alfred, your grandmother was born right before the Civil War, and she would have been old enough to witness what was going on in those times. You were born at the peak of the Jim Crow era, and of course, I'm positive you got some sort, especially from being in the South and whatnot, right? And then here comes the Nation of Islam, right, with not just a message that was pertinent for the suffering.
Yes, I'm on the air. Excuse me. I'm on the air. Yes, excuse me, someone. Yes. And so there we are. The message was pertinent.
Yes, it was pertinent. And it was something that this message was so pertinent and potent that even it struck fear into the enemy themselves.
Yes.
And there was an entire narrative about Black Muslims that was going on around that time. These militant, violent people, that struck fear into the enemy. You understand? And since the time that because the enemy, they like to play this demographical dance, right? They always like to put other people in Black communities in order to say, this is a model minority. Why can't you Black folk do what these model minorities are doing? At the same time, locking us out of the resources of the country.
Even taking some of us and making us models by saying that those who have been subdued. It's very interesting. I'm going to make a comment on this.
Okay, go ahead.
And I don't really like to make comments on politics. And it could get me in a lot of trouble, but hey, I'm in trouble. Being a slave, ex-slave in America is trouble. But I noticed that the president of the United States just appointed an African-American woman to the Supreme Court. But guess what? She's married to a white man. So what is that saying to black men of America? Now, they had a black woman judge that was married to a black man. And she wasn't appointed to the Supreme Court. Because they want to say, if you black, we want to let us know we have conquered you and your woman. And this is a very subtle form of white supremacy.
Yes, of course. Of course, right? And this is what black people don't understand, like most black people don't understand about our condition today, that these divide and conquer tactics are not something that are new. And there's always going to be another issue to divide you on. You understand? But it's how we play it. And
this is what the Quran says. The Quran says Allah said Pharaoh would slay the oppressor, that is, would slay their men and leave their women alive.
Yeah, exactly.
And for them, they have that which is irresistible. So that's what they're doing. So they're playing this out right now. Even the president, the vice president of the United States, they couldn't just put an African American like Val Dennings in the vice president of the United States. They had to put an African American who's married to a white man. So that is automatically saying to you, black men, you will never be good enough. And black women, you will be rewarded for abandoning your men. The same man that you came on the plantation with, the same man that you came on the ship with, the same man that you went through Jim Crow with. All of a sudden, you are being encouraged and incentivized to abandon.
And this is something that started with black feminism in the 60s.
Yes.
Right? We talked about it on this channel already with Gloria Steinem, right? And how
Flo Kennedy and all these types of people, Angela Davis, all those people were to humiliate. And really, Orlando Patterson, the historical sociologist, blames the black American man for the rundown conditions in the African American family. So, you know, we have a lot. And here's the point, brother. If Muslims ignore these questions, they're not worthy of inviting people to Al-Islam. Why should I, a Muslim, an African American, stand on the corner of Toronto, Quebec, of Lynchburg, or any place else, be willing to listen to a Muslim who ignores his plight? If
Thank
he
you.
can't,
Thank you.
I can take no attention to that narrative at all. If you can tell me what's going on in Palestine and Pakistan and Kazakhstan, and you can't tell me what's going on in Boogalustan, and you can't tell me what's going on in Rick Rawstan, then I don't want to hear
you. Thank you for saying that. Okay. So
and
I think we got sidetracked a little bit. So let's
you
go
can't tell me that 50 Cent need to get $1, but you know it's a cultural play too. Now here you call a man. Now remember, he didn't name himself. Mr. Jackson didn't name himself. The cultural people named him 50 Cent. And we used to say, you ain't worth 50 cents. You ain't worth a quarter. So we have to understand the schemes. As Allah says in the Quran, well, makaru, wa makrullah, Allahu khairun makra. They plot and Allah plot. And Allah is the best of plot. Well, let me shut up and let you ask questions. I'm not. You got me in giving a clip by the day, and I intended to be interviewed.
Inshallah. Yeah, so we got sidetracked. All this history is important and it's pertinent, and black people really need to learn from the history and not make it some sort of sideshow or some sort of like symbolic type of gesture, right? What is it that we can learn from our history in order to make the generation situation better? You know, we can't be in forever plate mode. You know what I mean? There comes a time where we actually have to put in some actual work into our communities in order to improve the situation, right? So now you grew up in pretty much the height of Jim Crow, right? Can you tell us of some of the stuff that you have seen or witnessed during your
I
lifetime?
can tell you, first of all, that when I got sick, I had to go to a waiting room. If I went to a Caucasian pediatrician, thank God we had African American physician, but they were not allowed to come to the hospital to see you. You had to get a white doctor. I'm using white doctor to see you. The hospital was segregated. It said Negroes, Negro women, Negro men, white, everything was color coded. The hospitals, the blacks had to be on a ward only with blacks. Black doctors were not even allowed to come in the hospital as anything but visitors. So that's my first experience going to the hospital when I was a young boy. Number two, I remember an African American calling up a Caucasian funeral home, wooden funeral home, and they put him in a mental hospital. One of his relatives had died, and they put this man in a mental hospital for calling a white funeral home.
Oh wow! Oh wow! Wow!
So that was one of my. Actually, they had very few encounters in Lynchburg with Caucasian direct white supremacy acts. I've had some white people try to invite me to some. They were in Lover's Lane and they were having sex, and they said, "Hey, little nigga, you want to see something?" Well, that was a minor incident. The other incident that I experienced was on a bus. Now, I brought this on myself. So I'm riding on the bus, and the Supreme Court, I think, had ruled that interstate commerce, blacks could be on anywhere on the bus. And I decided to sit in the front of the bus. So a white lady said to me, "Sonny, you can't sit up here." And so I told her, "Had you heard that the Supreme Court said I could sit wherever I want?" She said, she asked the driver, "Tell him he just can't sit up here." So she tried to get this other white woman. The other white woman, in a nice voice, said, "Sonny, you can't sit up here." Not son, Sonny, you can't sit up here. And then she tried to get another lady to tell me to sit in the back. Then she said, "Well, I guess it's all right. He's just a little nigger."
See, this is what people don't understand. Like, a lot of the foreigners, they come here, they don't realize that there are people alive today that lived through segregation.
Now, let me tell you where I really almost got killed at. First time I really called a nigger was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The place in 19 Circle, 1960, maybe 4 or 5, I believe it was, in the YMCA. And a Caucasian white man came in and said, "What is a nigger doing in here?" Now, never mind, I had been in the United States Navy because I had a surreptitious route back to Islam. After I joined the Nation of Islam, the temple in Lynchburg closed up. And so I got involved in the civil rights movement, where I worked with, Kwame Ture with then Stokely Carmichael. I worked with Willie Ricks. I worked with James Bevel, and I got involved in voter registration and really desegregating the South. Almost got killed down there, but I ain't gonna lie, I did escape that one because I worked in the office. I saw a Caucasian guy looking. I saw a Caucasian guy looking out. I was looking out the window, and he slapped an African American down who was about 6'3". He slapped him so hard that the brother fell backwards. And I'm not going to tell you that I slept under the bed that night. And I also remember when Emmett Till was killed. And I couldn't sleep. And also Max Parker. And another incident, which I wasn't directly involved, was when an African American woman was raped at Florida A&M University.
Wow.
And the person, 5 white men who gang raped her, were found not guilty.
Surprise.
Yeah, real surprise. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
The Emmett Till story, right? Because this is a kind of an important story. A lot of people might not know who it is. If you can tell us briefly what was going on with that, who Emmett Till was, and what was happening during that time, and why his story is incredibly important.
well, let me tell you why it's more incredibly important for me. Emmett Till was born July the 25th, 1947, the same year I was born.
Mm.
And he was dragged out of his bed. They said he whistled at a Caucasian woman, but the truth be told, we found out later that Emmett Till actually was a stutterer.
Mm.
And he was asking for Kenny, and he made a sound, and she thought he was whistling her. By the way, she's still living.
Yeah.
And she said this was a lie, and nobody charged her. Isn't that funny? Miss Bryant, as she is. She's never been charged with inciting people to kill a man when they went in the house while this young man was asleep. He was from Chicago.
May Allah, make her real nice and cozy in the hellfire. I mean,
yes, and be cursed in the grave.
Yeah, her and her family members and all those people who found Emmett Till guilty and lynched him. All of them. May Allah make them nice and cozy in hell. I mean,
they dragged him out. So that was then. There was another one, Max Parker. Nobody talked about him. But Max Parker was another African American that they charged with rape and dragged him out of jail and killed him.
Mm-hmm.
So our whole sojourn in America has been a life of terror.
Mm-hmm.
And until Muslims address those issues, I don't think Muslims are worthy of calling anybody at this time.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. My own daughter told me this 2 days ago, right? My daughter, mashallah, she's very, very intelligent. She's finishing up university this year. And she told me, she goes, Baba, what do Muslims have that everybody wants anyways? You know what I mean? All they are is a bunch of beggars.
Right.
Right? That's what my daughter said.
And you know what? Excuse me for being with the mic. I got an allergy. I have an attack of allergy. Let me take this allergy pill.
No problem. Right. So the thing is, if you don't understand what's going on in your history, you're not going to understand where your position is today. This is why I guess like Imam Alfred is incredibly important, because he's still alive. And now we can have a record of what was going on in those times. And because we became Muslim in the 60s, this is incredibly invaluable information, especially from the Black experience. You understand? So we have to understand this stuff to understand where we are now, because the infighting amongst Black folk, particularly in the Muslim community, has reached epidemic proportions. And we are carrying out fights that we don't need to be carrying out. And they're not our fights. They're just not our fights. Historically, they've never been our fights. This type of the Akita wars that are going on and all this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? What does a young Black man who has been, raised in hellish conditions in some project somewhere, and he's looking for guidance, why does he care about your fight with some group, some Islamic group somewhere? Why does he care about that?
And you know what? This is playing out even worse in the prisons. They're turning Muslims in prisons who used to be in the Nation of Islam days. A man became a Muslim, he was reformed. Today, his energies are being transformed into Jamaat fights.
Yeah.
And he may get knifed because he doesn't have the right Aqidah. He might just come off the streets. He doesn't know the difference between Salaam Alaikum and Salaam Alaikum.
Yeah.
He barely can pronounce the words. His intentions is good.
Yeah.
And they get him caught up in all these doctrinal wars. See, the first thing we need to teach our people is just to be a decent person. That's what I tell brothers when I'm working in the prison. Man, just be a good person.
This
Don't
is the
get
first thing the Prophet Muhammad used to teach the Sahaba.
Yeah, don't come
First
telling me
thing he used to teach the
I'm
Sahaba.
rock back at to Cape Ohio. Hey man, what's wrong with good morning?
Yeah. You know, it's funny you mentioned that because we were talking a couple of days ago and you told me something and it kind of like made me raise my eyebrow a little bit because it was true, right? You were saying that, you know, historically we understand like how people use sheikh, because I was calling you sheikh, right? Sheikh, right? Right? Because right, and because we're used to it if we've been in the Arab world or whatnot, right? And you know, I was in the Arab world. Yes, I've lived in Saudi Arabia for 9 years. I lived in Yemen for 6 months. I studied in Yemen in Dammaj, right? So we're used to calling people sheikh, right? So like a term of endearment, right?
Right.
Right. So it's no problem. There's no problem. Term of endearment, whatever, right? But you mentioned something to me, and you said that, you know, in Black America, we're used to calling people imam as a term of endearment. And then I had to think, right? And I was like, it took me back to my early days of Islam. Like, yeah, all the imams when I grew up, we called them imam. You know what I mean? Imam this, imam that. You know what I mean? So, you know, and I was like, yeah, this is true, right? So he goes, this sheikh stuff is fine, but it's more of an Arab thing. That's what you were telling me, right? And
That's right.
The whole point why I'm mentioning that is because I mentioned before is that our history, especially in the West, Black Muslims in the West, like all of our history here in the West, has been interrupted by other people, all of it, right? And this infighting that we have, these doctrinal wars, that's imported. That is not something that came up organically, you know, in the Black community. That is something that came from Easterners, and I 100% believe that these devil white supremacists has something to do with it as well, right? And they planted
and
it.
don't forget that many of the
And now
Muslims
we're fighting each other instead of looking at the enemy. Go ahead.
And then the second thing, remember, in Arab literature, African people, Dr. Akbar Muhammad, the son of the Abdullah Muhammad, who was a PhD in Islamic studies and taught Islam, had written a paper called The Portrayal of Africans, Blacks in Arab Literature. So we were always laughed at. And remember, don't forget that Bilal was laughed at because he could not pronounce the letter Jim. So there's been a historical connection with people looking down upon, even in the Islamic world. Now, coupled with the fact that many of them come here to drink, or as one brother put it in a very poetic way, he was asking in Arab, he said, did you come for dawah? He said, no, I didn't come for dawah, I came for dawah. And so when he comes here and see us practicing Islam, now this was in the 70s, and they saw Muslims, then all of a sudden he put his alcohol down, his girlfriend's short dress down, and now he go and get his wife from Yemen, go get his wife from Egypt, and now he wanted to be a Muslim. So he come into one of our mosques. I had a guy actually to do this in the message. I was giving the khutbah, and I was reciting Surah Duha. And my pronunciation is not the greatest. It's okay. And he corrected me in the middle of the khutbah. And I said, what do you say? I said, do you know that the Islamic law requires you to shut up? And I said, in those terms, and sit down, take a seat after you bathe. And I went through the whole thing with him. And I'm saying, and the believers in the masjid were scared. Because they think that this guy knows more than they do. And he's just a gas station attendant. He hasn't studied Islam. And he happened to be an Urdu speaker. So he doesn't know anything about Arabic. And if he does read Arabic, he reads it in translation and Urdu. But we have the tendency to think that some guy who came off a farm in Saudi Arabia, a guy who was an engineer, is knowledgeable of Islam. No, he's not. You and I, who have studied and devoted our time to studying the Islamic sciences, and I don't even knock the brother who hasn't studied the Islamic sciences. I mean, what they call Islamia, I mean, hadith science and all that. Yes, that's important. But if you just know how to be a good person, keep yourself clean, and have a halal livelihood, and try to get your children in an environment to learn Islam, you are one of the best Muslim believers on the earth. You're the best. Because this is a bad circumstance. We're not in the best of circumstances. But I'd rather be here than to be in many of those other countries. I've been over those other countries. I spent time in Saudi Arabia too, as they call it, Malakut Saudi. And by the way, I don't want to criticize the Saudis too much. I don't want nobody to come and cut my head off or grind me. But I just read where the king, the acting king, just said women don't even have to wear hijab. So what can these people tell me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
You know what you're saying right now, it's hitting home, because I grew up, I've obviously been Muslim a lot longer than me, but I grew up in the Ahmed Deedat era. Okay.
Yes.
Ahmed Deedat, I grew up in the the Bilal Phillips era, these types era. So Ahmed Deedat, he was basically he put the brakes on Christianity, and he taught the whole Muslim world how to basically, not only show that the Quran is true, and that show Christians themselves that Jesus isn't God, even according to your Bible and whatnot, and all the mistakes in the Bible, big mistakes. But he made Muslims very proud to be Muslim. You know what I mean? Ahmed Deedat, Sheikh Ahmed Deedat. But one thing he always did, and anybody can go see any of Sheikh Ahmed Deedat, rahimahullah, his lectures, and every single lecture he would butcher the Quran, and I mean butcher the Quran, right? And not one person would correct him, not one. But when a black person, okay, and it's not that they're trying to correct you. It's that it's this type of facetious way of saying, like, you shouldn't even be on that minbar, black man. Like, you know what I'm saying?
That's exactly what they're saying.
And the thing is that black people in general, right, have always been willing to learn Islam. Like, this is something that even up until this very day, you'll find it's rare to find like a black family that doesn't have a Muslim in it, right?
And very few black families that doesn't have a Quran in it.
Yeah,
and very few of them. And here's the thing. But of course, I'm a little different about Ahmed Deedat, Rahmatullahi. I don't think you gain much by putting other people's religions down. Nobody has called on me. I was a Baptist preacher. I know the Bible pretty backwards and forward. And I have never been called on by Muslim audience to come into interfaith dialogue. I've been with some of the leading Muslim scholars, and they've been in interfaith dialogue, and they're going to tell me that I can't talk. I said, you have to shut up. I said, I was dialoguing in the womb. My mama was a Christian. I mean, born again, washed in the blood, John 1:14, John 3:16, all of that.
Yeah.
And I could gingerly, well, at that time I couldn't debate with her because she would hit you upside there with a frying pan. But I will say this. I think we have the best approach. I know the Bible. You really, you can, it may have made Muslims feel proud, but I think I've seen Imam Alfred Muhammad and us better equip us and make us feel better about being Muslim. I ain't gonna put your religion down to pick mine up.
Yeah,
because
again, this is a thing with black people. We don't have a history of doing that.
Right.
There's this,
We already
all of this is new. It's all new. It's been happening within the last 20 years or so, where we have to put other people down. It's all imported, right? And on
right.
top of that, when I was mentioning that about Sheikh Ahmadiyya, nobody corrected him, but they have no problems correcting black folk. It's because there's a history of Easterners coming into the black community and trying to lead where black people are. And it happens up until this very day. Prime
That's right.
example of what's going on in Philadelphia. You know what I'm saying? Prime example. Not one of your own people leads your masajid there, and you're all claiming to be Salafi. You have Hassan Somali. Where he from? He came all the way from Cardiff, right? As a half Somalian, okay, Cardiff, Britain, to be the leader of a masjid in Philadelphia, and he would not even be calling the adhan in a Somali masjid, let alone be an imam. But he's your leader, and you have all these qualified black brothers.
That same thing is happening in East Orange, New Jersey. A predominantly African American mosque. Mm-hmm. The Saudis of one of those groups financed a brother, and he's happened to be a good brother from Upper Volta, also known as Burkina Faso. So they even try to turn our African brothers against us. Mm-hmm. We are looked down as the baby. And I mean, I know brothers who have gone to the Darloon and studied. And they come back and they won't even allow them to call that band.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But this is what's happening right now as we speak. And it's ironic because the African American community has the most students of knowledge.
That's right.
You know, students that have studied in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and
that's what I'm talking about. That's what bothers me. Now, those brothers, and there are hundreds of them, that they won't even allow them to even lead the Salat. Yeah, they won't allow them to call their thing. Now, I tell you, African Americans should wake up. They're having a big conference this weekend in Atlantic City called African American Muslim Summit. But nothing's going to come of it because all the people who are leading it are just colonial-minded African Americans. Yeah, they're there to push one sheikh over the other. They're there to push, and I mean, I'm talking sheikhs that they got overseas.
Overseas, yes, this is what I'm saying. Right? You got all this knowledge here. You can legit build like your own institute with all the students of knowledge from African American descent that we have here in the West, and they're just fighting each other, and they're not even being represented in their own masjid. And you think, what do you think? A Pakistani is going to hire an African American imam? You're sick.
My dear brother, my brother, I'm running out of time. Would we do this again? What is the name?
Absolutely.
I'd like to continue this. I'd like to set a date where I could do 2 hours uninterrupted. And I just got a sinus headache, and I got 2 calls to make overseas. And I'm definitely not going overseas, but I have to go for treatment. I do want to. Will you bring to the people's attention my need? I need. Well, I'll tell you later on those needs, but we will talk later. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You're. It's my honor, my pleasure, and you're my elder.
My honor and my pleasure.
You know,
it's my pleasure and my privilege to be with a distinguished, thinking African Muslim in the Western Hemisphere who has survived 500 of the years of the worst treatment known to man, and yet sits at the minbar, ready to give a fatwa. Isn't that, mashallah, yet a modern day Bilal? Rock put on his head and he said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Thank you, beloved brother. Thank you, beloved audience.
My pleasure.
I'm sorry I have to run, but we will be in touch.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's a great pleasure, and I hope to have you on again. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, brothers and sisters, I put the link in the chat if anybody wants to hop on with me. But again, we have this guest, right? And While we have people like this who are still alive, we have to let them tell their stories. We have to let them tell their stories because their stories are going to make us make sense of what's happening to us today. You understand? And why we have all these problems and issues as Muslims today. I was very humbled to have a guest like that. 75 years old and been Muslim for over 60 years. In America, and who was it that was going out to make the dawah to him? You understand? Like literally knocking on the door. Okay. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I keep saying grassroots dawah. That's what you have to do. You have to talk to your neighbors. You have to talk to your people. Go out and call the people to Allah. All this craziness that's happening on YouTube and Facebook, it's all fake stuff, man. It's not real. It's not real. And the amount of problems that Black people have, I'm very sorry. All this time that we got and they're using it to fight each other, how does that make sense? How does that make sense? All the problems that we have in the Black community, from gangsterism, drug addiction, imprisonment, mass incarceration, alcoholism, single motherhood, joblessness, homelessness, you name it. If it's a social problem, we are at the peak of having it. But we're going to use our time to fight each other. You know what I mean? It just make it make sense. Make it make sense. So please like, subscribe, share. I'll put the link in one more time if anybody wants to join me. All right. If anybody has any questions, anyone has any statements, let me look through the comments here. Let's see if any questions in the comments. Let's see here. Let me see, guys. All right. Like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Patreon, guys. But anyways, for those of you who don't know, when I became Muslim, in those days, there wasn't much information about Islam at all. There was no internet, okay? The information I got about Islam was from Encyclopedia Britannica, which, if you don't know what those are, it's like these thick volumes of books. It's pretty much Google in a book form, okay? Right? So large volumes, many volumes, and it's about world information and whatnot. So you learn about Islam from Encyclopedia Britannica, and the only audio cassette I got about anybody, I didn't even know what Allah was, what Muhammad was. The first cassette I got about that mentioned Allah's name and the Prophet Muhammad was from Louis Farrakhan. That was way back in 1990. You understand? Way back in 1990. You got me? So now, I've evolved, right? I've gone from that to, alhamdulillah, many stages, right? I was intrigued with the Nation of Islam. The first book I ever got about Islam, ever, okay, was a book from a Rafida Shia. It was called Introduction to Islam. I remember this book very well, okay? And it was teaching you how to make salat, how to make adhan. So I'm learning how to make adhan from this book. You understand? Allahu Akbar, right? So one day, for those of you who know Abdul Shahid or Abu Shahada, right? The da'i from Toronto, he was my older brother. Okay, put it that way. We went to the same school, and he would drive us, to the mosque or whatever, right? And so we go to this brother's house, and I've been practicing this adhan stuff, so I want to call the adhan, right? I'm young. I'm like maybe 16 at that time, 16 or 17. You get me? And they said, yeah, sure, but I'll go call the adhan. So I called the adhan. So I go, and I'm calling the adhan. Abdul Shahid is there, Abu Shahada. right? Imam Bilal Muhammad is there. Some other people are there, and I'm like, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu Muhammad Rasulullah. And I'm like this. And I said this, wallahi, I said this, okay? Ashhadu an Ali wali Allah, okay? Ashhadu an Ali wali Allah, okay? I said that in the Adhan. I didn't know. I know what that was, okay? I actually said that part in the Adhan, okay? So when I finished the Adhan, Imam Bilal was like, what's that? What's the thing that Bilal said, right, in the Adhan? I never heard that before. And the brother goes, see, Abu Sufyan is laughing. The brother goes, oh, he said that I bear witness that Ali is the friend of Allah. And he said that's from the Shia. That was the first time I ever heard what a Shia was. The reason why I'm telling you this is because maybe some people don't know about Salafiyah. Maybe some people don't know about Aqidah and Manhaj and these type of things. I didn't know what a Shia was. I got the book from a Shia, a Rafida Shia, right, to teach me about Islam. I didn't know that girl was a Shia. I didn't know what a Shia was. You get it? I think Islam is Islam is Islam. I didn't know there were many different sects and many different parts. Even when I never joined the nation, but I was like, kind of like intrigued by Louis Farrakhan. But I didn't know there were different brands of Islam back then. You get it? I did not know. I had no clue. But somebody had to teach me. What y'all do, you don't want to teach nobody. You just want to annihilate them. You want to pulverize them. You get it? If somebody believes differently from you, instead of, brother or sister, let's look at this thing that you're saying, this thing that you're doing. Where did you get this? Can you show me where you got this so I can follow it? Do you know that you're supposed to follow the Quran and the Sunnah, blah, blah, blah? And instead of, teaching them, it's not that. It's nothing even resembling that. It's all, this person has, Batani Aqidah, and this, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, it's like warfare for you guys. Had nothing to do with dawah. Maybe somebody genuinely doesn't know. I remember when I genuinely did not know. I remember those days. I remember the days where information didn't come to you easy like y'all. You just go to Google and type in whatever you want. You get it? I remember those days. And our elders, if I went through that in the 90s, then imagine what somebody went through in the 60s, in the height of the civil rights movement. But y'all don't have no mercy for those people. They were fighting a different fight than you. As a matter of fact, y'all have given importance to fights that you shouldn't be involved in and left the important fight completely alone. Y'all feeling me? But anyways, like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Patreon. I guess we'll call it a night, inshallah. Thanks for everybody who joined us and participated. I came to your peace, and I leave you all in peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.